Good morning, folks, and welcome. Rick Singleton here, Provost of Queen's College, and delighted to welcome you to another and a unique program in our continuing education program for clergy and pastoral workers. About a couple of years ago, we started the initiative of continuing education and have had a variety of efforts and all with measures of success. And this is a particular one. Actually, we have two on right now. One is a series on the creeds being done by our dean, Reverend Dr. David Bell, and this program on contemplative leadership that we're doing in kind of a collaboration with the Institute, the Shalom Institute from Washington, D.C. Margaret Bainfield is the executive director, and she's agreed to lead us in these sessions. We planned 5 last week. We had a winter storm that didn't impact Washington. They get different types of storms, but we had a winter storm that came and went. They don't linger as long as the type you'd get in Washington, Margaret. But we're delighted to have you with us and delighted to have this opportunity to kind of go into this subject a bit for the sake of the information and formation of those who are participating, but also as a way of kind of looking at this technology and this way of connecting people to give those who are in rural and remote areas opportunity to participate in this type of venture as without having to be on campus. And so if it goes well, we'll be asking feedback from all who are participating so that we can kind of gauge, does it have potential for some other initiatives that we might look at further down the road. So welcome to you all. Thank you for coming. And Father Gerald, I'll ask you to do a word of prayer to move us into the session.
Thank you, Rick. Of course, this whole initiative around contemplative leadership is an invitation that we hear from the Spirit for us to listen more deeply to what the Spirit is doing, and for us to learn to become co-creators with the Spirit. And part of this whole process in our contemplative learning and deepening is learning to listen from a place deeper than our thinking minds. The invitation is for us to learn to listen from that deeper organ called the spiritual heart. And so in just a few moments of silence now, let us just kind of settle into where we are and maybe focus on our breath for a bit and become aware of our desire to be in love, in the love that is God, and the Trinitarian dance that we are part of. And just to allow ourselves to feel the energy and to feel the Spirit that is resonating and emerging within us. Jesus, you invite us to follow you in the way of the cross. May we learn to empty and to open of all that is not of you, so that we can hear the Spirit more deeply and respond and cooperate. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gerald, and we'll pass it on to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Gerald. So welcome back, everyone. It's good to be with you again. And you'll remember that 2 weeks ago at our first session, I told you my story of losing my soul when I was teaching spirituality in a theological school, and that was not a good position to be in. And then I invited you into some guided meditations, reflecting on when your soul was thriving, when you were in a leadership role, and then a time your soul wasn't thriving, and then some current challenge you're in now, and praying that you can be in that in a soul thriving way. And then I invited you to share with each other about each of those, and to share in the whole group. And so that was a foundation, telling you something of my experience and then reflecting on your own experience, a foundation for this work that we'll do together on contemplative leadership. Because I believe, we talked last time about discernment and how your own experience of God, your own experience of those times when your soul is thriving, when you feel grounded in God, those experiences are your foundation for discernment, a touchstone for you to keep going back to and to be reminded, yes, this is what it's like when I'm spiritually grounded, when I'm grounded in God. And this is what it's like when I'm off, when I'm not so grounded. And so hopefully by noticing and naming those times, you'll become more attuned to how the Holy Spirit is moving in and through you. And you'll be able to live in those times of groundedness in God more fully and more often. So this week, what I'd like to do is talk some about stories, some stories from a book I wrote called The Soul of a Leader. And for this book, I traveled around and interviewed contemplative leaders and asked them about how they stay grounded in God, how they keep their souls thriving in the midst of the challenges of leadership. And some of these leaders were church leaders, some were leaders in the nonprofit world, some were leaders in business, some were leaders in healthcare, and so leaders from various sectors. And as I heard their stories, certain themes emerged, and those themes became the themes of the book. So you'll see that, and let me just check, can you see this, this PowerPoint slide called The Soul of a Leader, and starts with choosing the path? Is that clear to everyone?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, great. So you can see I divided the book into 3 parts: choosing the path, staying on track, and persevering to the end. And so I'll tell you just a few stories from the book and from other places of how people chose the path, how they started out by following the heart, finding partners, and daring to dream. And then we'll go on to the other parts. So following the heart, Rabbi Samuel Karff found himself as a patient in a hospital in Houston, Texas. And he was a retired rabbi. He had worked as a chaplain in a different hospital. And he noticed from his patient bed that the frontline caregivers seemed burned out. And they were always exhausted, and they didn't smile very much, and they didn't seem to get along with each other very well, and they didn't have time to really connect with the patient. They were just running from one thing to the next and didn't have time to connect with the patient as a human being. And he said to himself, this isn't right. He said, I think so many people go into healthcare because they see it as a sacred vocation. They really want to serve. They want to connect with the person. They want to be healers. And as he lay there and observed this, he said to himself, when I get out of the hospital, I want to do something about this. So he did. He went back to the hospital where he had served as a chaplain and talked to the CEO there, and he said, I would like to try a little experiment. He said, you know, I bet the frontline caregivers here experience some of the same things that I experienced in this other hospital across town. He said, I bet they are experiencing some burnout and exhaustion, and I'd like to help them get back in touch with their sense of sacred vocation. So the CEO said, well, okay, a little experiment is all right. Let's start with the frontline caregivers, the CNAs, the nursing assistants, certified nursing assistants, and we'll start with them. And so Rabbi Karf designed a 6-week program, and people could volunteer to sign up, and it came out of their work time. And they met for an hour and a half once every 6 weeks. And at the beginning, Rabbi Karf asked them why they came into healthcare. And time and again, people told stories like, well, I had worked as a candy striper in the hospital, and I really felt like I had something to give as I served the patients, or I took care of an elderly relative, and I was told, and I really felt like I had a gift for being with someone who was in poor health, and for encouraging the person, and for being a healer, and stories like that again and again. And then he asked them, well, what has happened now? You seem like you're exhausted and not thriving and burned out. What has happened? And so again, they told their stories. They said, you know, we're asked to do too much. We can't fit it all in the time we have. We have to rush from room to room, and we're at the bottom of the hierarchy, and nobody listens to our needs, and we don't really get to connect with the patient, and so then we just feel like machines who are treating bodies, not people, and it's very demoralizing. And so then they talked about ways that they could recover the sense of sacred vocation, and they talked about how they could be supportive to each other and be a team, and simply going through the 6 sessions helped them a lot. They felt reconnected with their sense of sacred vocation, reconnected with each other. And at the end, they wrote a sacred vocation oath. And they also made commitments to themselves and to each other. And they had a ceremony a little commitment ceremony at the end of their 6 weeks. And at the end of their ceremony, they took their oath together, and it ended with, "Nobody can take away my power to heal. Nobody can take away my power to heal." And so after the 6 weeks were up, Rabbi Karf went back to the CEO and said, well, the people who went through this program, there were 12 of them, were re-energized and got in touch with their sense of sacred vocation again, and they're committed to supporting each other. And now I'd like to do a follow-up. He said, because, you know, there are institutional structures and processes that led to this state of affairs in the first place, and I would like to invite the people who went through this program to tell us what some of those structures and processes are that need to be addressed. And the CEO said, well, okay, it can be a shorter one, just 4 weeks, and I'm open to any kind of suggestion, except not suggestions about compensation. We won't change how much they're getting paid, but I'm open to hearing other suggestions. So Rabbi Karf went back and said to them, would you like to participate in this follow-up program? It's 4 weeks long, and it'll come out of your work time, and you'll get support for your work during that time so that you have time to do it. And so almost all of them did. And so they talked about the structures and processes of the institution that had led to their state of burnout. And at the end, Rabbi Karf said, well, what are some things you would do to change the situation? And they came up with a list of 27 recommendations, and they were classified as inexpensive and moderately expensive and costly. And so 3 different categories. And then Rabbi Karf went back, and some of these suggestions were quite simple, like listen to us when you do the scheduling. They said, you know, our managers don't pay attention to us and our needs, and some of us are caring for elderly family members. Some of us have small children, and it makes a difference what shift we're on. And if we can have some attention to our needs in the scheduling, it'll make a big difference in our ability to give and in our morale. And so these suggestions went back, and of the 27 suggestions, 24 were accepted by the management. And so you can imagine what that did for the morale of the people who were used to being you know, at the bottom of the hierarchy, not listened to at all. And so they were able to change some of the structures and processes and create a culture where people's souls could thrive and where they could exercise soulful leadership. Now, the Sacred Vocation Project, you can look it up. There's a website for it. It's been going for, I think about 12 years now. And it has spread from, it's still mainly in Texas, various hospitals and clinics in Texas. It's spread to other places as well. And so I think they've done the Sacred Vocation Project, and it's grown into different kinds of programs, and they've worked not only with the frontline caregivers but with people in higher levels of leadership. So I think they have worked in about 20 different hospitals now and clinics, and at all different levels. And the head of the Baylor University Medical Center said, the Sacred Vocation Project is the best financial investment we've ever made, because you No, it's easy to see if morale is higher, then there's less turnover, there's less absenteeism. People are the employees are better caregivers, and so patient satisfaction is higher. And so offering the Sacred Vocation program has made a difference in the bottom line of the hospitals and clinics that have used it. So with that in mind, I would like to invite you to give yourself a soul score. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about those frontline caregivers that Rabbi Karf worked with, their soul scores were pretty low. Think about how much your soul is thriving in your leadership role. And their souls were not thriving. You see on a scale of 1 to 10 down there, with 10 being the highest, they might have been at a 1 or a 2. And in the story I told you last time of myself, when I burned out, when I was teaching spirituality, my soul score at that time was a 1 or a 2. And at the end of the Sacred Vocation program, and especially at the end of the second round, their soul scores were pretty high, like maybe 8 or 9 or 10. And so I invite you to take a few minutes and give yourself, and this can be just for you if you want. I'll give you a chance to share it with anyone you happen to be with today if you want to, but you don't need to show it to anyone. So your own personal soul score in your leadership role, and then think about your team, the people you work most closely with. What would you say the soul score of your team is? And then your organization as a whole. Think about your organization as a whole. So I invite you to take just a few minutes and write down those 3 soul scores. And now I invite you to take a little time to share with the people you're with. If you're with a big group, then I invite you to share with just one other person. Or if there are a few of you together, maybe 3 or 4, share as much as you're comfortable sharing. And you might not even want to say, you could say, these are my soul scores. You could say, I noticed that my personal soul score is higher than that of my team or my organization, or that myself and my team are higher than the organization as a whole, or anything you observed in doing this little reflection. So take 5 minutes and share with one other person or with a few other people, as much as you're comfortable sharing. If you don't want to share anything, that's okay. If nobody wants to share anything, you can have a few more moments of contemplative silence. And now I invite you to share anything you'd like to share with the whole group. So let's take some time now for anyone who wants to share anything you noticed when you did this reflection on your soul score. Again, if you want, you can share your numbers, or you can share observations about how they compared, or anything else you noticed. So I invite you to speak now in the whole group if you'd like to.
Just talking about that, I think, again, like...
This is Carmel, by the way, Carmel Doyle here at Queen's College. Continue, Carmel.
The organization as a whole, like our program has the academic, the liturgical, and the community aspects to it. And if I was looking at the organization as a whole, in terms of academic, I'd rate it high.
Mhm.
What people bring and how they bring it, the enthusiasm. But having been a teacher all my life, teaching can become a very individual show.
Mhm.
Okay? And that doesn't make it bad for students, but it doesn't necessarily make it good for the organization. And I
Mhm.
don't know, like there are of our whole group, there are some faculty who can make it to things, and there are others who just can't make it. It's just the nature of the space and the college and the people who are here. So that though I think they're doing a really wonderful job academically, they can't be part of the other pieces of it. And where those are key to our organization, therefore I'd rate it rather low.
Mm.
Mhm. 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 Thank you.
Others with comments for Margaret or for all of us?
I think, for this Carmel again, I think that my own score, or how I'd rate myself, is strongly boosted by the fact that there's a team that
Mm.
well together. It is really quite good. And without that, it would be very, very difficult to
Mhm.
keep yourself alive and well.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mm. I just comment in a general way that it's a very intriguing uh, story, really, to tell of that initiative. I worked in the healthcare system in pastoral care and ethics for my a long career, and I did find actually your story to be kind of relevant. If I might just take and affirming a moment, we had a very large venture in the organization I worked with, Eastern Health here in Newfoundland, on employee engagement. And,
Mhm.
the organization spent a lot of money on having assessment done and then initiatives to try and improve it. And there was a lot of assessment done and comparison of different work groups on different sites and different departments and different disciplines and what have you. But what was quite interesting and intriguing to the research team that were leading it, and actually one who was doing her doctoral work came to interview me about it, because our department, pastoral care, was very much an outlier to the entire organization, because the level of engagement and the various drivers was the term that was used, drivers of engagement, uh,
Mhm.
almost without exception were scoring quite higher than the rest of the organization. And
Mm.
the researchers wanted to examine what it might be. And they actually kind of had I guess, what I typically describe as a disguised solution, but I think they confirmed that it wasn't disguised at all. And that is that it was the spiritual dimension and that sense
Yes.
of calling and
Yes.
faithfulness to calling of the people who were working in the department, in spite of all of the other challenges that we had around us and that they, as the employees, had around them, including the leadership of our team. But it was really, but I knew nothing of Rabbi Karp's research, but I'm going to dive into it more and refer to it as a good resource for some of my colleagues who still work in that sector.
Mhm. 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 Interesting. Yes. Thank you.
Parker Palmer has done a similar thing with educators.
Yes. Mhm. Yes. Anyone else like to share any reflections on your soul score or anything else? Well, thank you all, and let's move on to finding partners. So Rabbi Karf followed his heart. His heart was saying, oh, his heart was hurting when he saw these burned out caregivers, and he said, this isn't right and something needs to be done about this. And so he followed his heart. And and as he did, this this sacred vocation program came into being. And then people who follow their hearts often find that they need to find partners. Even as you said, Carmel, your team is so important for keeping your soul thriving. And so I'd like to talk about Julius Walls at Grayston Bakery. Julius Walls was for many years the CEO of Grayston Bakery in Yonkers, New York. And you can see on the logo there, Grayston Bakery, great desserts by great people doing great deeds. They say at Grayston Bakery, we don't hire people to make the brownies. We make the brownies to hire people. And at Grayston Bakery was started to hire people who were seen as unemployable and to train them and help them become employable, both at Grayston Bakery and elsewhere. And so whenever there is a job opening at Grayston Bakery, people line up outside, and the first person gets the first job, second person gets the second job, third person gets the third job, and so forth. Anyone can come in and get a job. And this means that they are hiring people who are homeless, people who are straight out of prison, people who are just out of drug addiction drug treatment programs. And so they will take anyone who wants a job and train the person. And everyone starts out on the brownie line, and it's hot, monotonous work. About 50% of the people who start out working at Grayston continue, and many work their way up and take on positions of greater responsibility. Right now, about 95% of the people who work there started out on the brownie line, came in off the streets. And so they do try to promote from within and train people to take on more and more responsibility. They, for example, one person, Rodney Johnson, is the head of brownie production now. And he came in off the street, and he had been a drug addict and in and out of prison, but he's been clean and sober for a long time now, so you don't have to worry about the brownies. They're okay. He worked his way up, and so he's head of brownie production now. And when he is asked, you know, why do you do this work? You probably made a lot more money as a drug dealer, right? And he says, well, yes, I did make a lot more money as a drug dealer than I do as head of brownie production at Grayston Bakery. But he said, I got tired of hiding out from the police all the time. I got tired of being in and out of prison. But most importantly, he says, I have a daughter, and I want to be able to look her in the eye and say that I'm doing something worthwhile in the world. And so there are many Rodney Johnsons at Grayston Bakery. As I mentioned, about 95% of the people who work there have worked their way up. And then people go on from Grayston Bakery to find work in other places. Grayston Bakery's claim to fame is they make all the brownies for Ben & Jerry's Fudge Brownie ice cream. And they also make desserts for high-end restaurants in New York City who serve them as their own desserts. And so their products are top of the line. So in order to do this work, Julius Walls had to find partners. And Julius started out as he was studying to be a Roman Catholic priest, and then he felt called to this work. And he said that he views this as his ministry now. And so it's a calling for him. And he's had to find partners, not only the people who work with him in the bakery, the people he has promoted to management positions, but also the people on the board. And Grayston has not only it's not only a business that makes money and trains people to be employable. It also now has other organizations. The Grayston Foundation is funded partly through proceeds from the bakery and partly through grants. And then Grayston Family Support Services has grown up to help support the people who came in to work in the bakery. Grayston Child Care provides child care for employees of the bakery. Grayston Housing provides housing. They found that when they were hiring the people who came to work at the bakery, people had many needs and needed support in many areas. And so Julius needed to find partners who could work with him and address all of these various needs so that people could learn to stand on their own 2 feet and support themselves and then help others. Another theme I saw as I talked to these leaders was that they dared to dream. You can see that both Rabbi Karff and Julius Walls dared to dream big in the work that they were doing. And another person who dared to dream was Jean Quinn. Jean Quinn started Sophia Housing in Dublin, Ireland. And her dream was homes and community for homeless people. Jean started out as a nurse, and she came to Dublin from her home city of Cork for further study as a nursing student. And she was surprised at the homelessness that she saw in Dublin. She didn't know there was so much homelessness in Ireland. And so she wanted to help, and she joined an agency that was working with homeless people, and she soon found herself in over her head. She said, you know, I didn't know how to deal with people who were struggling with not only homelessness but also addiction and anger issues and mental illness and the various things she encountered among homeless people, and she went back for some more training and got help so that she didn't feel so alone. And then as she continued to work with this agency, she observed that they would find housing for an individual or a family, and then 6 months later, the individual or the family would be back out on the streets again. And she noticed that it was because those deeper issues weren't being addressed. The mental illness, the addiction, the basic life skills that people didn't have. They didn't know how to budget. They didn't know how to hold down a job. They didn't know even how to prepare for a job interview. And she said, I want a more holistic approach. And so she started Sophia Housing. The dream was homes for people and community, and that the people who worked in Sophia Housing would also be part of the community where the people who were getting into homes were living. And they would start support groups for them. And so they did that. They started groups, and in every housing community, Jean created what she called a wisdom center, where there's a fountain and beautiful flowers and a window. Often they are connected with nature somehow, so a window outside and stones and kind of a peaceful garden area that people could go to and have time for reflection. And so she wanted to nurture the spiritual lives of people and teach them life skills, as well as giving them a place to live. And so it rapidly spread beyond Dublin, all across Ireland. And so now thousands of people are back on their feet and are in homes and are working and have had support for addressing their other issues. So Jean dreamed big, and she too had to find partners. She had to find many partners, especially as they began to grow across Ireland. And at a time of declining numbers in religious communities, a number of religious communities said, we want to donate our big houses we have that we had built back when we had so many people coming into the novitiate, and we don't anymore, and our big houses are almost empty. And Jean said, well, I'll accept your donation on one condition. She said, you're the ones with the relationships in your region, in your part of the country, and I will accept this donation on the condition that you will be involved, that you will help build these connections, help find the partners who can support people as we begin to give them homes. And so they did that, and so they were the ones who were networked in their communities, and they were the ones who were able to help. And many of them found that, they were asking, well, what is our vocation now? It's different in this world we live in now than it was when our religious community was founded back 200 years ago or whatever it was. And they found a new manifestation of their calling. The ones who were teachers found that there was a place to teach among these people they were serving as they served homeless people. The ones who were nurses found there was a place to serve, and so then they built the partnerships with the educational institutions and with the healthcare institutions. So, daring to dream is the third part of choosing the path. So, those are three examples of people who chose the path, and I'm wondering if anyone has any comments or questions before we move on to staying on track. And let's move on to the next part, staying on track, part 2 of the book. So, it's one thing to choose the path with energy and vision, and follow your heart and find those first partners and dare to dream together and create something new. It's another thing to stay on track through the ups and downs of leadership, and the ups and downs of service, and the ups and downs of ministry. So I found three themes that emerged related to staying on track as I talked to people. One was keeping mission at the fore, one was practicing gratitude, and one was battling for the soul. So I'll talk about at least a couple of these. So back to Greyston Bakery. I mentioned that as they hired people for the bakery, they discovered other needs that people had. And so, of course, because some of the people they were hiring were homeless people, those folks needed housing. And so they created Grayston Family Support Services to go along with Grayston Bakery. Teresa McCoy was the head of Grayston Family Support Services for many years, and they did something similar to what Sophia Housing did. They said, you know, in order for people to really make it after they move into our housing, we need to provide them with support. And they said everyone who moves into our housing we want people who will agree to meeting twice a week in 2 different kinds of support groups. One is basic life skills, where we teach budgeting and parenting skills and household management, and Teresa found that in many cases people weren't parented as children, so of course they didn't know how to parent their children, and they didn't know basic life skills, and so much of what they were teaching was the things that parents teach their children. You know, be sure you take a shower before you go to work, and this is what healthy food is, and here's how you cook some simple things, and so they were providing that kind of teaching, training, and basic life skills. And then they were also, in their second meeting each week, when they got together, they were providing more soul support. They were inviting people to share what was on their hearts and building community among people. And they used a practice called the Way of Counsel that comes from a few Native American traditions, where people would go around the circle and use a talking stick, and each person, when it was his or her turn to talk, would be holding the talking stick. And they had some basic guidelines like speak from the heart, listen from the heart, don't interrupt when someone has the talking stick, let the person talk, be of lean expression, lean, L-E-A-N, expression. They found that, Teresa found that people in the groups really did share from the heart and said, you know, this is the first time I've had a group of people who would listen to my story, and the first time I've been with other people who are struggling with some of these same things, and the first time I've been treated with dignity and respect as I struggle with these things. And so finding that the Way of Counsel and using these practices was helpful in Grayston Family Support Services, Teresa brought it to other Grayston groups, including the bakery, and the senior leadership team at the bakery uses it, and the people who are being trained who come in on the brownie line use it. And they have found that often the people who are struggling the most are the best at being true to the guidelines, whereas the upper management sometimes is not so good at listening from the heart and sharing from the heart and being of lean expression and listening without interrupting. And they have to keep practicing in order to do it well, whereas the people who are struggling more, who are right off the streets, who are in the family support services groups, are so delighted to be able to be in this kind of group, that they are faithful to the guidelines more easily. So, so Teresa has found, in order to stay on track, that it's important to keep mission at the fore. They need to keep going back to their mission and remind themselves, this is what we're about. We're about serving people. We're just like the bakery says, we don't hire people to make brownies. We make brownies to hire people. Teresa has to keep reminding herself, we're here to support the families so that they can be more fully functioning. They can stand on their own feet. They can continue to hold a job. And as you can imagine, there are many challenges that Teresa has faced in working with this population and working with all the different systems she has to interact with, the social service systems. And so for her and her team, keeping mission at the fore has been really important. Sometimes they'll start a meeting by telling a story of someone who has been served well by the mission, or even inviting a person who's been served well to tell his or her story, to remind themselves, yes, this is what we're about. It's not the paperwork we have to deal with. It's not the bureaucracy of the social service system. It's not today's crisis, today's fires that we're fighting. It's this larger mission, and that's what keeps us going. So keeping mission at the fore has been important for Teresa and for many of the leaders I interviewed. Then practicing gratitude. Practicing gratitude is something that is the easiest intervention in any human community, whether it's a business or a church or an academic institution or a family. It's an easy intervention, doesn't cost anything, doesn't take very much time, and it has a lot of leverage. So I'll tell a story about Tom Henry, the managing director of Landry's Bicycles. Landry's Bicycles is based in the Boston area, Boston, Massachusetts, and Tom found himself in a position in 1994, position in which Landry's Bicycles was in trouble. They have several stores. It's a small business. They have several stores in the greater Boston area. And they had opened a new store, and they got behind schedule. And the construction of the new store wasn't finished until November, when winter was hitting in Boston. And as you all well know, your climate, people don't ride bicycles as much from November through about March in Boston. Might be even longer for you all. And so they weren't getting any customers. Their original plan had been to open the store in May, and then when the construction got behind schedule, they ended up opening in November. So they were paying rent, they had inventory, they scaled back on their employees, but they still were paying for some employees, and they had missed the season. So almost no one was coming into the store. And the bank that was holding their loan, that had given them a loan, found out about their situation, excuse me, and called them in and said, we're going to pull your loan, and we recommend that you file for bankruptcy. And Tom was not happy about that. For Tom, the the mission of Landry's Bicycles was bigger than just selling bicycles. He saw, and Landry's as a whole, saw the mission of Landry's as bicycling for a better world. Bicycling because it's better for the environment, getting more people on bikes so that more cars could get off the streets. Bicycling for people's health, to get people out of their sedentary lifestyles. And so he had a larger sense of mission, and his goal was survival. He did not want to file for bankruptcy. So what did he do? He brought this challenge he was facing to a group that he was part of called Seeing Things Whole. And this was a group of leaders, organizational leaders in the Boston area, who got together regularly to share challenges they were facing and to bring their values to bear on these challenges and to help each other bring their values to bear. In a world where so much focuses on just the financial bottom line, they wanted to orient themselves around their deeper values and their souls. And so he brought this challenge to the Seeing Things Whole roundtable, and he said, here's our situation. The bank is advising us to file for bankruptcy. We don't want to. We have this vision of bicycling for a better world. I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. And as the people around the roundtable, the Seeing Things Whole roundtable, listened to Tom, one person spoke up and said, you know, Tom, you are seeing your work right now as a burden. What if instead of seeing your work as a burden, you saw it as a gift? And Tom said, a gift? How could I see it as a gift right now? It does feel like a burden. But he thought about that, and he went back and he said, you know, I did start to see my work as a gift, and I started beating that drum. I started blowing that horn and saying to the employees at Landry's, you know, we have great work that we're doing here. There is no better work in the world than our work. There is other good work, of course, yes, but there's no better work than our work. We are selling bicycles for a better world, and we're serving our customers well, and we are creating a good place to work. And he started to invite people to practice gratitude. Gratitude for their work, gratitude for each other. It was about time for the annual company retreat, and so they went on their retreat, and he said, let's go around this circle and say something that we're grateful for the person on our right. And they did that, and it was a very powerful experience. And so then they incorporated it into their annual performance reviews, and they do 360-degree reviews. And he said, let's start with gratitude and saying things that we're grateful for as we're asked to give feedback to our colleagues and our supervisors and those we supervise. And so they did, and it was such a wonderful experience. People said, oh, I can't wait until next year's performance review. And then they started practicing gratitude in the stores. And Tom said, you know, whenever somebody does something that you appreciate, be sure to say thank you. And when somebody comes and tells you there is a phone call for you and a complaint from a customer, thank the person, you know, don't shoot the messenger. And when you go talk to that customer, thank the customer for the feedback, because for every one person who complains, there are 7 people who vote with their feet and walk away. And so we're grateful for the feedback when we find something has gone wrong, and we'll make it right. And so they started practicing gratitude, and it shifted the culture. and they got re-energized, and so what happened about the money? Well, because of this shift in the culture and the new energy, Tom himself got re-energized, and he went out and talked to people, talked to his friends, and he didn't have rich friends, but he talked to people and said, look, this is our situation. The bank has pulled our loan. Would you lend us money? One person had just received an inheritance and lent Tom $5,000. Another person who was an artist lent Tom her life savings, which was another $5,000. And bit by bit, he got enough. They needed $30,000, which at the time was a lot of money for this small business. And they got it from loans from friends. And then by the time the season came around again, because their morale was so high and they had such great vision and energy, they were able to turn it around and to bring in enough business that Tom was able to pay back all his friends within a year. So practicing gratitude is a way to shift a culture, and again, any kind of organization, and that's what happened at Landry's Bicycles. So I'll skip over Battling for the Soul for now, and wondering if there are any questions or comments on keeping mission at the fore and practicing gratitude.
I'm Margaret, Gerald here. I mean, these are core points, of course, when it comes to being community. And you know, I think about in our contemplative context, you know, it's one thing for us to say, you know, practicing gratitude, another thing to say, you know, to see our work as gift and not burden. You know, talk about shifting the culture that we're in within our organizations. So maybe just I'm asking, so where does, you know, maybe a little more clearly, or, you know, where does, you know, contemplative practice come into this?
Yes, thank you, Gerald. You know, as I mentioned last 2 weeks ago, last time, the times of remembering when you were spiritually grounded and what that's like, taking the time for that reflection, stepping back, those are contemplative moments that ground us and that make it possible, I believe, provide the foundation for keeping mission at the fore, for practicing gratitude. When we step back and take time for contemplative practice, whether it is through deeper contemplative prayer, you know, perhaps 20 minutes of centering prayer, or even shorter practices that reconnect us to the spiritual heart. Those are times when we get refreshed and renewed, and often we'll receive guidance. You know, I'll come out of a time of centering prayer and have a sense, oh yeah, this is what I need to focus on, or
exactly. You know, so, you know, as I look at, you know, the soul of a leader, and in the slide that you have up in the direction in which we're going with this, I mean, underneath all of this, you know, choosing the path, when I see these titles, I mean, this is for any leader, and I'm thinking in our context as a church, and our listening, where we're listening from, like you said about that listening circle thing where they pass the stick around, you know, to listen from their heart, to speak from their heart. When we were trying to listen for and discern our path, in each context, which is different, each parish, community, following the heart, finding partners, daring to dream. All of this arises or emerges, from a deeper place of listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the path emerges, like you said, coming out of a time of centering prayer or whatever the practice is, but just with a lifestyle of listening more deeply, this direction that you're laying out before us. So when a path does emerge, when we do find partners to help us listen and go forward, when we are willing to dream, and then to stay on track and keeping the mission in the fore and be practicing gratitude. All of these things emerge from a stance or a lifestyle of listening more deeply. So that's what I'm, as you're going through these points, that's, what I'm hearing myself is that, every, as this unfolds, it's always from a deeper place.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And yes, thank you for raising that point, Gerald. I'm doing kind of a quick overview here of the book. And in the book itself, I talk about some of the contemplative practices that these leaders use and how they are able to listen deeply and to follow their hearts and find partners and dare to dream and stay on track in these ways. And so even like with Sophia Housing, I mentioned the wisdom centers that Jean Quinn was seeking to offer the people she was serving that same kind of contemplative space and those same contemplative practices that she herself used. One of the things she did was, she said, often people who've been living on the streets can't go right into something like centering prayer. And so I did things like take them out into nature, right, and invited them to just be and then to share what they noticed, what it was like for them. She said, I also took them to the art museum and invited them to share, and many of them had never been in an art museum. And she said one woman who had been very quiet, who hadn't been willing to share in the group at all, stood in front of a piece of art at the art museum for an hour. And when we came back and started to share about it, she opened up and her whole story came out, and she told us things she had never told anyone before. And it was because the art, that just being in that open, unguarded way where she felt safe in the art museum, opened things up for her. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. All of these leaders had contemplative practices themselves and then invited others into contemplative practice.
Exactly. And whatever our context is, and then these different stories that you're sharing, and anyone who's listening to this now, so whatever our parish context, whatever our life context, it's all different. And so, but how we listen would be the same, so listening from that deeper place for what God is doing. And so that, as we learn a contemplative orientation, contemplative practice, whatever our situation is, the deep listening is the same. What emerges is going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you, Margaret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Gerald. Anyone else, comments or questions?
Margaret, Sheldon McLeod here. I'm just wondering, these are tremendous opportunities for us in leadership. How do you see affecting some of these practices if you're not the leader at an institution or a church or something like that, but maybe a senior leader? How do you think you can encourage some of these reflective practices, or the gratitude, or keeping, our mission and as a focus if you're not the top person, so to speak?
Yes, great question, Sheldon. The example of the Sacred Vocation Project, where Rabbi Karf went in and worked with frontline caregivers, of course, he had the ear of the top person, so that helped. But he was really, he didn't have any authority in that system anymore. He was retired. And then he came in and worked with those frontline caregivers. And because of the transformation that happened there, the managers said, oh, we'd like to do something like this too. And so those were the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they continued doing what they were doing even after Rabbi Karf left. He had a relatively short time with them, and so they kept practicing that team building and sharing with each other, and gratitude was part of what they did too. And because other people in the organization saw that, they said, oh, we could use some of that too. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, there's not always openness. And sometimes it does. Sometimes that transformation that happens in individuals and teams at a lower level in an institution can spread to other parts. In a church, for example, one committee you might think about is there a committee that is, perhaps the Christian Education Committee, or if the vestry isn't ready for it, is someone else ready for it? A hospitality committee, some committee that might say, let's have a contemplative approach to our committee meetings and to our work together. And so let's listen for what the Spirit might be inviting us into. And our Christian Education Committee was founded, or our way of doing Christian education was founded back when the church was living in a different reality than we are now. And what is the Spirit inviting us into now? And how is the calling of our church to be manifested with the children in this time and place? Or adult education, how is it different in this time and place? And so maybe there's a committee that is fertile ground for this kind of contemplative listening, and for hearing, for listening to the heart and following the heart, and daring to dream together, and doing work together in a different kind of way. And I have found in churches or any kind of religious institution that when people do their business in this contemplative way, they leave renewed and refreshed instead of depleted. It's not a chore to come to their committee meetings. It is just as nurturing and renewing as it is to go to Sunday morning worship. And there's a book by Charles Olson called Transforming Church Boards, which I'll talk about more later. We'll do one of the exercises from there, and where he talks about how can we make our church boards and committees just as life-giving as our worship together on Sunday morning. And so at any level in an organization, a team or a committee can try this out. And so I found that sowing seeds, inviting people, saying, let's try a little experiment. Let's try doing our committee meeting together in a little different way this time. what if we really listened to God and listened to each other, and let's see how that is. And so, in whatever language is right for that particular committee or that particular team, you might have to start small and invite just a few moments of silence. One of the things we do in our Shalem meetings, when we have board meetings or committee meetings, is we start and end with prayer and with some silence, some contemplative silence. And we also ask for silence occasionally in the midst of the meeting. Sometimes we'll assign someone to be the presence keeper and to ring the bell or verbally invite us into silence when it seems that there are too many words or we just need a break to listen more deeply. And so we found that if a discussion goes on for more than 20 minutes, full steam ahead, often ego has taken over. And if we can take a break, take a couple minutes of silence, and remember to listen with the heart, listen to God, listen from the heart to each other, then it helps us get reoriented. So those are a few things you can do at any level in an organization.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. Anyone else? Questions or comments?
I just add to it the comment to follow up on how one influences, I guess, when you're not in the official and formal leadership role, but there is a significant clout to leading by example. And, people who come to a group of any sort, whether it's a committee or community or faculty or home that people are living in, but they have that kind of steadiness and that practice of whatever sort it is. But there's that sense of being spiritual and being a conduit of the spirit that makes an impression and has an influence regardless of the power and authority that the person may have in a formal sense. They certainly have an influence on shaping and influencing the culture. And we've all been part of it where somebody, because they're in the room, the type of conversation and the type of matters that seem to be of importance kind of is lifted up in a dignified and a wholesome way, not as
Yes.
a wet blanket or a stuffy type, but there's just a kind of spirit to some people in their presence that has an influence. And I think that loops back to some of what Sheldon was inquiring about as well.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
I want to say, Margaret, also, I really appreciated your description of, on a practical level, how to bring contemplative practice into, the places we are, whatever the nature. It's groups who are gathered because they live in the same facility as with Sandra's group, or people who are connected as parishioners, as with Joanne and her colleagues and friends on New World Island, or here at Queen's College, where faculty or others. That there's a very practical description, and I think something that is worth any of us or all of us trying on occasion, see how it helps us kind of integrate that contemplative practice into what we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Someone else wanting to say something?
As Carmel, I think one piece that helps, and it probably is one that's an ongoing practice, is to help people learn to listen.
Mm-hmm.
know how to listen. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
some attention is paid to learning to listen, and not just to individual words or individual statements, but to be able to make that a bigger piece. Because I honestly think it's not lots of times malice or inattention. It's just something, a skill people have never been. It doesn't come naturally to some, and for the others, it needs to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
But so often we have our minds made up on matters
Yeah.
that we don't need to listen. We
Yeah.
think.
Right. Right. And that's such a good point, Carmel, because the sometimes people try to introduce discernment practices, say in a church, and they find that what people need is a class in some basic listening skills first, because discernment is all about listening to God, listening for how God might be speaking through each other, that deep, respectful listening from the heart, listening to the heart. And if someone has never learned to listen, then it's hard, even impossible to make the leap from not knowing how to listen to this deep discernment. And so to offer a class on how do we listen to each other, and it can be fun. You can practice in partners, and you can give examples of poor listening, do a little role play in front, and oh well, one example is when someone is really speaking from the heart and the other person just starts giving advice, or another example is when another example of poor listening is when the person says, oh well, let me tell you this story from my life, and then it becomes all about that person. And you can do little role plays, and people identify with it. And so often a class on basic listening skills that can be helpful, either before or in tandem with inviting people into practices of discernment.
I think also,
So it is time to go, and we will do Persevering to the End next time. And I'd like to invite you to close with a one-word prayer. Anyone who wants to offer one word that represents what you take away from today. And I'll start, and then anyone else who wants to offer one word, and that'll be our closing prayer. So let's take just a moment of silence, and then I'll start, and then anyone else can speak. Connection.
Heart.
Grateful.
refreshing.
Openness.
Amen.
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 Thank you all, and I look forward to next week.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you all. And we will gather online again next week. Blessings till then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.